Morally gray characters. I've noticed a trend in recent years where it's become generally accepted to give higher praise to stories if they contain morally gray characters. And though I understand the merits of including complex characters in your narrative and generally agree that characters who get the spotlight should, more often than not, be at least somewhat complex, don't you think it's a little odd how we so often equate a character's gray morality with depth? If you've ever watched or read One Piece, Naruto, or Full Metal Alchemist, allow me to try to break the paradigm. This is Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy is a warrior for freedom, a loyal captain, and a friend who habitually saves his friends from becoming their worst selves. He's not the deepest character, but he's not a surface-level goofball either. Hidden under his fun-loving exterior, we see a staggering degree of emotional intelligence and intuition. Further, he sees the political reality of the world around him for what it is and responds to it like no other man would, by staring it down and socking it in the face. Are you going to tell me that Luffy lacks depth just because he's by and large a strictly morally upright character? This is Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto's entire story is about conquering his demons, earning the trust of those around him, and saving his best friend. Naruto also grows, like, a lot. His growth is most evident during the Pain arc. Here, Naruto experiences the death of his master, the destruction of his village, the death of his other master, defeat at the hands of the antagonist, the apparent death of a childhood friend, total loss of control over himself, and the realization that his simple understanding of the way the world works would not suffice going forward. What does he do? He adapts. He strolls up to the main antagonist once the fight is over, admits to him the shortcomings of his worldview, and learns from him enough information to give an answer sufficient to change the mind of the most determined foe he'd ever met. Naruto didn't have to darken his morality to solve his problems. Do you mean to tell me with a straight face that Naruto lacks complexity, that he has no depth? Allow me to provide one more example. These are Edward Elric and his brother Alphonse Elric from Full Metal Alchemist. Edward and his brother made a huge mistake when they were little that cost them greatly. They tried to revive their mother using alchemy, but they gave up nothing of equal value in return. Consequently, the ritual took half of Ed's limbs and Al's body in its entirety and created only the most crude and barely alive version of their mother they could have ever imagined. What they had unwillingly given up was the bare minimum and could never come close to the value necessary for recreating human life in its fullness. In that moment, they learned the value and the dignity of the human person and the full meaning of the law of equivalent exchange. It's because of this failure that the boys refuse to ever put aside the dignity of the human person. This is also the reason they're disgusted by Philosopher's Stones and refuse to use them. For in the Philosopher's Stone is found nothing but the unwilling sacrifice of innocent people, an equivalent price to pay for the power to create anything you want. They once wanted nothing but to get their hands on one, to restore their bodies without having to give up anything at all. But upon learning its secrets, they wanted nothing to do with this abomination. Ed and Al are morally upright because they know evil, because they've experienced the price of villainy, because they know temptations and shortcuts for the lies that they are. Do you seriously mean to tell me that these characters lack depth? I think you get the point. Characters can be brought low, torn down, and built back up again. The way your character responds to this process naturally generates depth. Nowhere in this process is it necessary to sprinkle in some morally questionable choices. The fact of the matter is, these characters wouldn't work if they committed moral failings and either never acknowledged them or did but never regretted them. You could argue that these characters work like that because they're intended to be morally upright, that this doesn't apply to characters who were made from the ground up to be morally gray. So, fine. Let's look at intentionally morally gray characters and see how they fare. Let's begin with Light Yagami. Light attempts to impose his own sense of justice on the world by means of mass murder. He lies to everyone around him, sabotages his loved ones, alongside many other misdeeds that I won't get into so as to not unnecessarily spoil the story for you. Despite all of this, Light does these things for what he believes are good reasons. This is all done in an attempt to create a more just society. Light is a morally great character and, due to his intelligence, he's also a very complex character. But as for his depth, I don't think it's fair to say that Light Yagami compares to Naruto or Edward in matters of character depth. Next, let's look at Lelouch Lamperouge from Code Geass, also known as Zero. Zero styles himself a warrior for liberty and justice. He creates the Black Knights, a resistance group dedicated to fighting against Britannian oppression, protects and cares for his sister Nunnally, and liberates Japanese areas under Britannian control. Conversely, Lelouch is also prideful, careless, manipulative, vengeful, fratricidal, and largely self-centered. Is he deep? Certainly, but take a look at where that depth comes from. Lelouch is pulled between two worlds, peace and war, tranquility or vengeance, settling for what you have and pushing for more. His depth isn't due to his great morality, but rather to the contradictions playing out within him that he hopes to resolve. In one moment, he'll defend Nunnally with his life, and in the other, he'll put her in harm's way. Yes, to rescue her, but with serious and obvious risk to her safety. Lelouch seeks a resolution. He doesn't abide these contradictions within him. At one point, he almost accomplishes this, but unfortunately.
俺が本気で命令したら誰だって逆らえないんだ。俺を撃て。朱雀を解任しよう。どんな命令でもね。
もう変な冗談ばっかり。
本当だよ。例えば日本人を殺せって言ったら君の意思とは関係ない。まさか。
そうね。日本人は殺さなきゃ。
The evil within that Lelouch had fed for so long got the upper hand on the good he sought. See, the conflict in the first half of Code Geass is, as far as Zero is concerned, less driven by a morally gray main character, and more driven by the good and evil within him vying for control. The good hopeful, the evil underhanded. Finally, let's look at morally black villain. Mahito from JJK is morally black. Part of his death is due to his apparently simple outlook on his existence. He is a curse and he must act like it. The difference between a surface-level curse antagonist and Mahito is that Mahito sees the other options. He understands opposing worldviews, and he rejects them. He brings out the best, or rather worst, in his fellow curses by acknowledging their higher ideals and telling them that ignoring their nature as curses is unnatural. For such a young curse, he's surprisingly wise. He doesn't just torment Yuji for funsies with no thought put into his methods. Rather, he identifies Yuji's ideals, motives, connections, and uses them to break him. These people make you hopeful? They're dead now. You save people indiscriminately? I kill people indiscriminately. It was fascinating seeing how deep Mahito's understanding of Yuji's psyche went and how well he understood what made him tick. Then there's Mahito's outlook on life based on his ability to perceive the soul and his unique perspective and attempt to understand it. Read it again for yourself, it's a pretty interesting set of pages. Finally, there's his constant growth. For the entire series, Mahito gets better and better at being a curse. At first, he settles for having this overpowered curse technique, Idol Transfiguration. Then, his ambition moves him to create a domain. After that, having fulfilled in his mind the purpose of his being, he unleashes a Black Flash. Afterwards, he unlocks a secondary form. Finally, he pulls off a split-second domain expansion that impresses even the likes of Sukuna, the main antagonist of the story. What a character, man. As he says, he's a mirror to Yuji. He's a perfect foil to our protagonist. They help each other grow as characters while moving away from each other on total opposite sides of the moral compass. Next, let's talk about Nagato Uzumaki, best known as Pain. I'll summarize his backstory. Nagato lost his parents and best friend to war. His mentor's answer to the problem of suffering was insufficient, so he created his own. He would force peace through a shared fear of himself. He would force unity by making himself a shared threat to all. Nagato had it all planned out, and Naruto didn't. The choice he gave Naruto was simple: let me have my way with my plan, or give me a better one. What Nagato failed to take into account, maybe because he chose to ignore it, is the cycle of hatred and violence that would inevitably form as he executed his plan. You might think Nagato is a morally gray villain because he shares similar traits to the aforementioned Light Yagami, but look again. Nagato's identity is pain. He wanted to force peace through pain, through suffering, through fear. One could argue that Nagato's plan was a mask for executing vengeance on the nations that made him suffer, by forcing them to suffer in kind. His peace wouldn't be real peace. He didn't want to get rid of conflict, only war. It was selfish wish fulfillment, a way to redeem the hardships of his past, which Naruto had to break him out of by offering a real solution, an image of true peace. It was this new way of bringing about peace that awakened Nagato to the reality of what real peace was and how good it could be. Nagato sees the light only after Naruto shows it to him, but he didn't know it during his career as Pain. In other words, Nagato can't be morally gray, because there was no white to brighten his black. You've heard the title of the video. Now's the time I begin to talk about demons. Let's get it out of the way. Although belief in evil spiritual forces is common to human religion across the world, the concept of demons that manga and anime tend to take inspiration from is Christianity. The whole concept of the show, Seven Deadly Sins, from its title to its protagonist's flaws to its antagonists, is all taken from Christianity. Stories that feature the devil or the demon lord also draw their inspiration from Christian demonology. The same also applies to characters straight up named Lucifer, the devil, Beelzebul, and a whole host of other demonic titles. Despite their inspiration, the authors of these stories employ a degree of creative license that often leads to a portrayal of demons which differs significantly from their theological origins, regularly diluting the seriousness of evil and moral culpability as understood in Christian theology. Here's just a few examples. Rin Okamura, the son of Satan, rejects his demonic heritage and chooses to fight against his father and his demon army. Nezuko, from Demon Slayer, retains her humanity and fights against her demonic urges to protect her brother and others. The Devil, from The Devil is a Part-Timer, is portrayed as a hard-working and caring individual. Pochita, from Chainsaw Man, is a cute little dog devil that sacrifices himself to save the protagonist Denji. Power, from Chainsaw Man, forms a bond of friendship with Denji. Meliodas, from Seven Deadly Sins, is shown to genuinely care for his loved ones. Akira, from Devilman Crybaby, fights evil with the power of demons. Before any of you start trying to play devil's advocate, I should point out, I'm not the one who brought up demons. These shows deliberately chose to use and abuse this concept. I'm not the one who made the enemies in Demon Slayer demons. The author did. You could have called them vampires or something, because that's what they actually are. I didn't make Meliodas the son of the Demon King. The author did. I didn't make Power or Pochita demons. The author did. All I'm doing is calling this practice what it is, a misappropriation of my religion. Some might object that I should just shut up and write my own manga, where the demons are all evil, if I'm so hung up about this. Sure, let's see how stories like these fare. Enter Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. The demons in Frieren are objectively evil. They're lying, cunning, manipulative, murderous predators who have no shred of empathy for mankind. It's perfect. Our protagonist, the titular Frieren, is unashamedly hostile to demons. In no uncertain terms, Frieren hates demons and tells us that they're evil. Now let's see the reactions on social media. Right, yeah. People were upset that demons were depicted as, well, demons. You know, the objectively evil, unchangingly malevolent opponents of mankind. The reaction to Frieren's depiction of demons is split between those who'd argue it's wrong to depict a whole set of living sentient beings as wholly and entirely evil to the core, and those who don't find it morally objectionable, but think it's boring, lazy, or meaningless. To the former objection, I'd reply that this only makes sense if your framework for what constitutes sentient beings is exclusively informed by humanity. You assume there can't be objectively evil sentient beings because the only sentient beings whose existence you acknowledge are humans who are not objectively evil. Even this view is suspect because human beings are fallen creatures who, while still possessing the ability to do good, have a tendency toward evil without grace. This is what naturalism does to the average consumer of fiction. It gives them an incomplete picture of reality, a deficient framework from which to analyze the media they consumed. If you were to look beyond the scope of humanity in the natural world and gaze into the supernatural for a moment, you'd find that there are both objectively good and objectively evil sentient beings. Traditionally, we refer to these as angels and demons. If you acknowledge their existence and what their nature truly is, you're better able to digest not only the idea that a group of objectively evil sentient beings exists, but also that it's not morally objectionable to state this plain fact. To the latter objection, well, it's interesting, isn't it? The standard, the status quo, the thing people are used to, are the morally gray demons, not the morally black. Plainly evil sentient demons are foreign to the mind of the average anime viewer because of the prevalence of morally gray demon characters. The evil ones haven't really been given the chance to shine as antagonists for a long time, while the gray ones have been getting story after story, developing the concept and exploring it in depth, often through the vehicle of protagonists. We see the world through their eyes, the justification of their morally questionable choices from their standpoint, and the effects that the consequences of their actions have on their psyche and their bodies. In a very real sense, we're conditioned to sympathize with them. The reality is that for as much as we like the term, many morally questionable choices go very much unquestioned by us, the audience. Looping back to the opening, we tend to equate gray morality with death. I would suggest that one of the ways we do this is by projecting our own personal death onto the characters that we watch in the form of expectation. What I mean is this. It might be the case that most people live a morally gray lifestyle, and are therefore more willing to see the death in gray characters because this death is more easily recognizable to them, and therefore seeing requires less effort than that of morally white or black characters. So when the character archetype of the demon is presented to us in a story as objectively evil and unjustifiable, after having watched and read so many stories where they're morally gray and very much justifiable, we recoil. This isn't how it's supposed to be, we think to ourselves. This is boring. I don't see the relatable challenges the gray one suffered. This evil one is alien to me. We see our own challenges, which in themselves contribute to the forming of depth in the human person, reflected on the gray characters, which we then naturally assume are deep as well. But my question is this: do you have to relate to demons? Think about it for a second. The ordinary understanding of demons is that they are categorically different from humans on a metaphysical level. They're just not like us. They don't think how we think. They don't value what we value. They don't have human souls, human brains, human bodies, nor human emotions. So why do we have to be able to relate to them? Why do these otherworldly forces have to be understandable to the human psyche on its own terms and through its own ordinary experience? I think this expectation on our part, an expectation that storytellers acknowledge and want to meet, is mistaken. Further, just because you can't relate to a character doesn't mean they're not deep. I know I certainly can't relate to Naruto. I'm not an orphan, I was raised in a loving home, I had good and loving friends, nobody despised me, my best friend isn't turning evil before my eyes, and I don't have a demon fox inside of me. Yet Naruto's death is evident if you're willing to see it. As we've explored before, through the examples of Naruto, the Elric brothers, Mahito, and Pain, character depth isn't determined by which shade of gray matches a character's morality. You can give morally upright and morally bankrupt characters plenty of depth, but you might argue, okay, assuming what you say is true, and you can have deep but morally black demon characters, there isn't anything wrong with having morally gray demons in our stories, to which I would reply, really? I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that stories should enrich their readers if they want to be good stories. That's the whole purpose of themes, for example. Moving on from tragedy, fighting for what's right, learning to care for your friends, and coming of age are all themes. We universally accept that a good theme is a necessary component for a good story, even if we're not willing to admit it. That's why we all sort of collectively groan when people praise stories like the unspecified notorious revenge power fantasy, a trashy story with a trashy revenge theme. We recognize on some level that a story needs some virtuous, good, or otherwise redeemable takeaway for it to be considered good at all. Hence my tangent on themes. So then what's the matter with the morally gray demons? Simply put, due to their prevalence, their perceived depth, their relatability, all things that we've discussed before, they give the average anime consumer a warped perception of demons. That's the takeaway. They aren't seen for the objectively evil enemies of mankind that they are, irredeemable and void of any good. Instead, they call the demon Pochita cute. They cosplay the demon Power. They root for the demon Meliodas in fight scenes. They sympathize with the demon Nezuko. This is the takeaway, one that doesn't enrich, but rather misinforms and deceives. If this is how stories make you feel about demons, they shouldn't be included in the first place. Demons are bad, actually, and stories should act like it. This has been the second episode of Piercing, my commentary on media from a Catholic point of view. Like the video, subscribe, ring the bell, you know the drill. If you want to hang out with Catholics like me, even if you're not quite Catholic yourself, check out the Catholic Diocese of Discord and tell them I sent you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your day.